headlines. Korea's tax revenue falls under the government target in 2014 for the third straight year amid political debates over how to finance welfare programs with no tax hikes. The confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Lee Wan-koo begins today with a series of allegations challenging his chances. And sleep-deprived Korea. We'll look at the whys and how Koreans are fighting to get more sleep. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Thanks for tuning in. Coming to you live from Seoul, I am Kang Tae-ri. Tonight we begin with taxes. Amid the ongoing debate over welfare without a tax hike, Korea's finance ministry reports that tax revenue fell short of its target for a third straight year in 2014. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea's tax revenue came in at around 205 trillion won, or roughly 190 billion US dollars last year. That is $10 billion shy of the government's goal. Last year's shortfall was the largest on record, breaching that posted at the height of the Asian financial crisis in 1998. The finance ministry largely attributes the shortfall to sluggish corporate tax revenue stemming from companies' weak performances. It also says slumping domestic demand and a strengthening Korean won against the greenback prompted a fall in value-added taxes and customs duties. For next year, the government is aiming to collect tax revenue that's up around 2% from last year's target. It's confident about the goal, saying it will push through structural reforms and economic revitalization plans this year. But experts are skeptical about it.
The pace of recovery in China and in European countries is likely to fall below expectations this year, and the economy at home is not showing signs of a strong recovery either.
Given that Korea's tax revenue is expected to fall short of the government target for the fourth straight year in 2015, which could limit government spending on key areas. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, President Park Geunhye and the ruling party have agreed to form a bi-weekly consultative body between the presidential office, the government, and the ruling party. The party's policy chief said the meeting, which will likely start later this month, will aim to bolster policy coordination. The president has been heavily criticized for a lack of communication skills when handling state affairs. Following her remarks yesterday that there will be no tax hike to cover welfare programs, she stressed today that what's more important right now is to revitalize the economy. On that note, she sought party support for the passage of related bills. And at the National Assembly, the two-day confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Lee Wan-koo got underway this morning. It will be a tough ride for him as he faces a mounting series of allegations against him. Our National Assembly correspondent Park Ji-hye reports.
The two-day confirmation hearing for Prime Minister nominee Lee Wan-koo got underway at the National Assembly on Tuesday. Lee, the ruling Senate Party floor leader up until late last month, began by expressing his regret over a series of allegations against him that have piled up in recent weeks.
As I was preparing for this confirmation hearing, I was once again reminded of how small and problematic I was. I bitterly regret my deficiencies.
The 65-year-old three-term lawmaker is facing a tough road ahead amid various allegations surrounding his past. These range from accusations of real estate speculation to doubts about whether he and his son properly fulfilled their mandatory military service. However, the questions about his attempts to wield his influence over reporters was one of the main issues of contention between the rival parties. The debate grew so intense that the hearing was suspended temporarily. Lee emphasized that his comments that he could pull strings regarding personnel at some news media companies were made during a private lunch with a few journalists. Lawmakers from the main opposition party said the recording of the remarks should be played at the hearing, but the ruling Senate party objected to the idea.
We refuse to allow the recording, which was illegally acquired. If opposition party lawmakers go against our objections and attempt to play the tape, they'll be going against the spirit of compromise.
We just want to know whether his remarks are something that could have been made casually at a private gathering or whether it was an indirect, implicit threat against the media.
Opposition party lawmakers released a recording to reporters at the assembly, but they vowed to continue with the hearing process. Lee's hearing is scheduled to end Wednesday, and lawmakers will vote Thursday. President Park Geunhye's attempts to replace the incumbent Prime Minister Chung Hong-won has so far failed, with previous two nominees both resigning at a consideration process. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
There are many eyes on the actions of the newly elected opposition party chairman Moon Jae-in. Recent polls show his ratings have gone up since his election. While some say his political attitude has become more flexible, others say his new style is just a ploy to win more votes. Our Kwon So-ah reports.
Moon Jae-in is back in the public eye after bouncing back into a position of power. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy's new leader disappeared from public interest for a while after losing against President Park Geunhye in 2012. But his popularity appears to be back. In fact, a recent public opinion poll by Real Meter showed 22% of people now see Moon as a potential presidential candidate for 2017. He now has more support than UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who's been eyed as a favorite for months. The pollster says Moon's unprecedented visit to the graves of former right-wing presidents Lee Seung-man and Park Geunhye on Monday was viewed in a positive light by supporters of both the ruling and main opposition parties. Moon said his decision to pay respects reflected his will to bring about national unity as well as strong national security. Political watchers say Moon has adapted his political views since his defeat to President Park. But critics say his change of face is a mere tactic to garner more supporters and that he needs to do more.
President Park Geunhye stole the spotlight back in 2012 with her welfare and economy pledges. Moon has changed quite a bit seemingly in preparation for the 2017 presidential election. But to show his sincerity, he needs to come with different policies.
Analysts add that while welfare is the current subject of discussion, Moon should lean towards other policy changes such as inter-Korean issues, but with a more conservative approach. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
With the demanding academic and working schedules of many Koreans, getting a decent night's of sleep has become a difficult task. That's why an increasing number of people here are now seeking professional help from sleep clinics. Our Kim Ji-yeon has this story.
Hunched shoulders, dark circles under droopy eyelids, excessive yawning. These are telltale signs of sleep deprivation, a common condition among Koreans. The national sleep average is less than 8 hours, the lowest among OECD member countries. So what's keeping them up at night?
I sleep for 3 to 4 hours a day during the academic semester. I feel dizzy all day, so I try to get fresh air from time to time and try to sleep while commuting.
These days, I sleep like 5 hours because of night culture in Korea. My company has a lot of meetings and conferences, and after that, we go drinking. And so it's really hard to go sleep.
If aroma candles and counting sheep don't work, what can one do to get a good night's rest? Specialized medical centers have popped up in recent years to help, like this clinic in downtown Seoul. Quality shut-eye is important for the brain, says the clinic's doctor. While we're sleeping, the brain helps the body dump out waste, making way for a fresh start the following morning.
Sleep deprivation is truly detrimental to the body. The immune system will start to fail, inducing all sorts of diseases, including arrhythmia, diabetes, and stroke. It's important to ask for help and receive treatment, particularly for those suffering from insomnia for more than 3 months.
Physical and psychological methods are often used to help insomnia patients. Those suffering from sleep apnea may get help from a surgical procedure. For others, a 5 to 8 week program to change cognitive and behavioral patterns could be the ticket to reclaiming those precious sleep hours. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Korea's IT and communications sector enjoyed another strong month in January. The ICT exports came in at $14 billion, up 6% from a year before, on the back of strong memory chip shipments. But handset exports continue to fall amid intensified competition from Apple and Chinese manufacturers, which boosted ICT imports, by the way, to Korea. Imports of mobile phones in particular soared more than 55%, mostly on rising demand for Apple's new iPhone 6 models. Samsung Electronics and Microsoft have ended their patent dispute over Samsung's use of the Android system. Handset makers producing Android smartphones pay royalties to Microsoft for patents for things like multiple window browsers. Microsoft demanded that Samsung continue to pay interest, while Samsung said that Microsoft's acquisition of Nokia breached their cross-licensing agreement. The terms of the latest agreement between these two tech giants were not released, but the reconciliation could further boost the collaboration between the two, with Samsung also producing Windows-based smartphones. The global steel market has been suffering a supply glut, mostly due to a steady stream of shipments from China. And with China's steel exports hitting a new high in January, Korean companies' woes are expected to continue this year. Our Kim Min-ji tells us more.
Steelmakers in Korea are in for a tough year, especially with growing shipments from China in a market already suffering from an oversupply. China, the world's largest steelmaker, exported 10.3 million tons of steel products in January, up more than 50% from a year ago. The gain comes despite a new tax rule in China that was expected to curb the country's steel shipments this year. China ditched a tax rebate of 9 to 13% on steel products that contain boron, a chemical added to steel products to increase quality. Many Chinese steelmakers had taken advantage of the tax rebate system, enjoying a return equivalent to roughly $30 to $40 for every ton of steel exported. But with no signs of the supply glut dwindling, analysts in Korea say the country's steelmakers have a rough year ahead of them.
Chinese steelmakers have turned to other chemical products that are still subject to tax rebate. And due to China's oversupply of steel products, exports will remain robust. Falling prices will also add to Korean steelmakers' woes.
Experts say Korean companies need to focus on lowering their prices in order to gain a stronger foothold in the market. Korea shipped just under 370,000 tons of steel to China last month, down more than 8% from a year ago. In the same period, Korea's imports of Chinese steel rose about 1%. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Chinese tourists are visiting Korea in ever larger numbers, especially during the holiday season. The Korea Tourism Organization projects some 126,000 Chinese tourists will visit the country during the week-long Chinese Spring Festival that starts next Wednesday. This would be a 30% increase compared to last year. For the whole of 2014, more than 6 million Chinese tourists came to Korea, making up well over 40% of the total number of foreign visitors. The Culture Ministry says it's preparing to release more leaflets and storybooks about Korea in the Chinese language, as well as some shopping promotion guidebooks. And we have a new ranking of global cities. In terms of sustainability, Frankfurt has come out on top. This is the latest index by design consultancy firm Arcadis, which lists Seoul as the most sustainable city in Asia. Globally, the Korean capital ranked 7th, ahead of Hong Kong and Singapore. The index ranks 50 leading world cities and grades them on their environmental progress, viability as a place to live, and their financial stability. Frankfurt was recognized for its green areas and numerous parks and rivers. A high-ranking U.S. official says Washington is in strong support of inter-Korean dialogue as it could pave the way for Pyongyang to end its nuclear ambitions. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken stressed that Seoul and Washington share a common goal to denuclearize North Korea and that if relations on the Korean Peninsula improves, it could create a better environment for engagement. Washington's number 2 diplomat made the comments Tuesday before departing South Korea for China as part of his 3 Asian nation tour, which includes a stop in Japan. Officials and researchers from South Korea and the U.S. will gather in Washington next Tuesday to mark the first anniversary of the UN Commission of Inquiry's landmark report on North Korea's human rights record. They are expected to discuss Pyongyang's human rights violations and its future. The event is garnering a lot of attention because it comes at a time when North Korea is demanding that its human rights records be expunged following a defector's recent confession that parts of his story in a prison camp were falsified. U.S. President Barack Obama says that he's holding out hope for a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine crisis before pulling the trigger to send weapons to support Kiev. We turn to Paul Lee at the News Center for more. Paul, the president says the U.S. could no longer remain a spectator in all of this. What is he looking for in his upcoming peace summit?
Well, Obama made it clear that he will wait for the outcome of this fresh round of 4-way talks set to take place in Belarus this Wednesday. He's likely counting on a long-term ceasefire deal at the very least, but the best-case scenario would be Russia letting go of its support of the separatists holed up in eastern Ukraine. This as 7 Ukrainian soldiers and 5 civilians there were reportedly killed in the latest fighting. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
U.S. President Barack Obama says there has been no decision yet on whether to send arms to Ukraine. He said he will wait for the outcome of Wednesday's talks in Belarus between the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany before deciding on whether to send lethal arms to Kiev to help the Ukrainians fight pro-Russian separatists in the east of their country. Wrapping up talks with German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the White House on Monday, Obama stressed that diplomacy and sanctions remain the top priority for resolving the crisis.
If, in fact, diplomacy fails, what I've asked my team to do is to look at all options. What other means can we put in place to change Mr. Putin's calculus? And the possibility of lethal defensive weapons is one of those options that's being examined. But I have not made a decision about that yet.
Obama made clear that he could put more pressure on Ukraine by providing arms. However, that could endanger Washington's unity with Europe on the issue. The German leader, who is opposed to sending weapons to Ukraine, urged Obama to think very carefully about his next move.
We continue to pursue a diplomatic solution, although we have suffered a lot of setbacks. These days, we will see whether all sides are ready and willing to come to a negotiated settlement.
The decision on supplying arms to Kiev has been postponed temporarily as Merkel and French President François Hollande are working to find a diplomatic solution. The two are due to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko in Belarus on Wednesday, in what some experts say could be the last realistic attempt to resolve the crisis diplomatically. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And turning to the Middle East, Paul, Syria says that it has been receiving U.S. military intelligence on airstrikes targeting Islamic State militants inside its borders. Although there's no confirmation coming from the Pentagon, Syria's president has come out to speak on the matter.
That's right. Bashar al-Assad has publicly revealed that his government allegedly received messages from the American military about those aerial bombings on IS targets inside Syria, but he did stress that there was no direct cooperation in carrying out those operations. This latest revelation came during an interview with the BBC published on Tuesday, in which Assad denied his forces had been dropping barrel bombs on rebel-held areas, killing thousands of civilians. He also ruled out joining the international coalition that is seeking to destroy IS. That coalition has been battering IS targets in Iraq and Syria since last September. Following its recent surge in bombing runs against the jihadists, Jordan said the U.S.-led operations have killed about 7,000 IS militants.
And shifting to Europe now, the new Greek prime minister says he's confident in reaching a compromise on his country's bailout program. This, of course, despite wide differences remaining between Athens and its European creditors. How is Greece's new leader approaching this debt crisis?
Well, the anti-austerity Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras said he didn't believe there was a serious reason to block a new agreement to renegotiate its mounting debt, but he did warn any impasse due to political reasons would, quote, torpedo Greece's European future. He made the statement from Vienna, where he held talks with the Austrian chancellor, who said the goal must be to keep Athens in the Eurozone. Earlier speaking before Greece's Parliament, Finance Minister Avanos Varoufakis called the current bailout program a toxic and ineffective drug prescribed by the Eurozone.
If I believe that a retreat and an acceptance of the current bailout program, which as regards its logic and philosophy remains unchanged from 2010, would at some point, perhaps with some difficulty and pain, take Greece out of the crisis, I would recommend we go ahead and submit without dogmatism and egotism. But I don't believe it.
An emergency meeting of Eurozone finance ministers will be held on Wednesday, where Greek officials will present a fresh proposal. According to a source cited by the New York Times, the detailed compromise will keep about 70% of the current bailout terms.
And finally, Paul, controversy is brewing over at the U.S. broadcaster NBC News. Nightly news anchor Brian Williams is under fire after admitting to reporting false war stories from Iraq. How is NBC dealing with all of this?
Well, the leading American broadcaster put out a live statement saying Williams has decided to remain off the air on Monday in response to intense criticism over his inaccurate accounts of his time in Iraq more than a decade ago. The embattled anchor has since apologized, but the public doesn't seem quite forgiving. Our Connie Lee has more.
Good evening, I'm Lester Holt.
It's Lester Holt filling in for Brian Williams on NBC's Nightly News. Williams, who's been anchoring this newscast for more than 10 years now, remained off the air on Monday as controversy swirled around him. Holt addressed the issue.
We want to take just a moment to tell you where Brian is tonight. In a message to his colleagues over the weekend, Brian told us he's taking several days off this broadcast amid questions over how he recalled certain stories he covered. He'll be off while this issue is dealt with.
Williams took himself off the air over the weekend because of a false claim that he was on a helicopter that was hit by a grenade in Iraq back in 2003. Over the years, Williams has retold the story many times, but has now admitted the claim was false after veterans from the incident reported on social media and media outlets that Williams was not on that helicopter.
I want to apologize. I said I was traveling in an aircraft that was hit by RPG fire. I was instead in a following aircraft.
In the first published interview out on Monday in the U.S. military newspaper Stars and Stripes, Williams said he assumed the helicopter took damage. But despite his apology and explanation, many journalists and military personnel are calling for his resignation. NBC has launched an internal investigation into Williams, who is now also facing scrutiny over statements he made on other major news events. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather forecast. We kicked off the Tuesday morning under mild winter conditions, about 11 degrees warmer than yesterday. The cold air has moved out, but microdust has moved in. In fact, levels are at 146 micrograms here in Seoul, where an air quality watch has been issued. At the moment, it is mostly clear skies overhead, but foggy conditions are blanketing some areas. And over on the eastern coast, air quality remains extremely extremely dry, where humidity levels have dipped to as low as 27%. As for tomorrow, less than 5 millimeters of precipitation is expected for the Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces. Other than that, looking ahead, it looks like we won't have to worry about a cold snap for a while. On to tomorrow's readings. The daytime high here in the capital hits 7, Daegu and Busan reach 11. Meanwhile, Jeju reaches up to 12, Dokdo hits 7, Mount Kumgang -5. That's all the updates I have for you now, and I'll be back with more after 10.
Thank you very much, Bo Kyung, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.